10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Warning. The material discussed in this show may be sensitive or a trigger for some listeners. Strong language and topics are discussed. We talk with active duty service members and practice OPSEC at all times. You have been warned.
The Bipolar DM, Jason Caughton. His show talks about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Check us out right here on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on WLFE-DB.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So take a seat, sit back, and get ready for the Bipolar DM.
Welcome to the Bipolar DM Show on WLFE-DB Radio Network. I am your host, Jason. This is a show about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Watch us live on WLFE-DB.com or on Strim TV under the Variety Unlimited channel, and on twitch.tv/The Bipolar DM. We are live 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and so that's Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch us on any one of those live there. If you'd like to contact the show, you can email me at thebipolardm@gmail.com, or go to my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. And there you'll find not only a way to contact me, but as resources and my blog and my podcast I still occasionally do, and links to my live shows, the other shows I have going on. So a lot of information there at thebipolardm.com. And if you are a supporter of the show and like to help us out even more, we do have a Patreon account set up, and that is patreon.com/the bipolar DM. And we have several different levels of support that is available each month, working their way up. We'll be playing around with it too, maybe make some tweaking and adjustments though, but we got goodies available at each level of support, going from buttons to stickers to t-shirts and hoodies. And so lots of good stuff there. So if you go to patreon.com/the bipolar DM, you can find that there. However, if you just like to buy a t-shirt or a button or a sticker from us, we do have a Facebook store set up. If you go to facebook.com/bipolar DM, you'll go to our Facebook page, and there you'll find our store, and you can make purchases through there. One thing that I want to do mention, of course, every episode, is that we are a member of Safe Space. And if you're not familiar with what Safe Space is, this is a virtual safe space for you to come to without fear of judgment or being harmed in any way. You know, we are not doctors, we're not lawyers, we're not here to solve your problems or anything like that, but we're here to listen without judgment and to give you resources in order to get help that you need if you're in crisis, or, you know, don't let it get to crisis. If things are getting rough, ask for help. Ask for help soon, and ask for it often. And don't let it become catastrophic, and you're at your wit's end, at your end of your rope, before asking for some kind of help. And so that's we're a safe space, and real proud to be a part of that. Now on today's show, we're gonna split things up a little bit. So first half of the hour, we're going to talk a little bit about maladaptive ruminations. and what that is, as well as bipolar flashbacks, some things that I personally suffer from, and what those things are about and what they do and how they affect a person's life. And we'll start with maladaptive ruminations. I mean, now, this is not a clinical definition. It's more of a some doctors use it, some don't. It's not a DSM, criteria or anything like that. But what it is it's really intrusive thoughts, and most often unpleasant thoughts of some kind that's very distressful. And we get trapped in a loop, and it's like being on a hamster wheel where no matter how fast you go, you are going nowhere. And you're just going over the same ground over and over again. And it's, everybody does it every now and again, but for me, myself, and for a lot of people with bipolar, it's almost 24/7 that something's going on inside my head, some kind of conversation, or just thoughts in general, processing. And but when I get stuck up on something that's very distressing to me and just dwell on it and ruminate over it, it can be very destructive to my relationships and to my personal health as well. The problem is that it's very difficult to ignore these thoughts. It's not like I can just switch it off and turn off all the thoughts that are going on racing in my head, but it's not impossible. It takes a bit of work, and some of that is doing some techniques such as distracting, getting your mind off of whatever it is that you're dwelling on, whether it's just jumping on television and watching a sitcom or something like that you can just throw yourself into, read a book or meditate, or any way that you can get out of your head and clear your mind. Do that. So work on distracting. Some of the problems that we have is that we have cognitive difficulties with some of our cognitive skills when we're distracted with maladaptive ruminations. And so, there's a couple things that we can do, some things that I have done that has helped me with dealing with these thoughts and these intrusive thoughts. And one of the first things is realizing that you're not alone in this. Other people have it too. It's not just you. And in fact, between 20 and 30% of people with bipolar are comorbid with with an OCD of some kind. And whether it's counting or ritual or whatnot, it doesn't matter. But you're not alone in this. You're not the only one that suffers from this. And so when you realize that, take comfort from that, and then also realize what this actually is, these thoughts. First and foremost, no matter how bad the thoughts are, they are not going to hurt you physically. You're not going to end your life, But the other thing, though, too, is that you need to take a step back and assess the situation as a whole, looking at, the whole forest and not just the trees. And, realize that these things, they're only thoughts. That's all they are. They're just thoughts that are running through your head just like a rat in a maze, going over and over again the same old ground. And so, distracting yourself, changing your focus, redirecting your attention, doing those things help break up the cycle, that's this vicious cycle of maladaptive ruminations. And when I say they're unpleasant thoughts, most of them are in some way, a lot of times they're inwardly directed, towards me, whether it's cutting words, reliving things from the past over and over again, failures and losses and stuff like that. I'll relive those things, and what's so hard about it is the intensity of the emotion, because at certain points I feel just as intense emotional pain as I did when it was first happening to me. Time has not healed all wounds, and sometimes with these conditions, you're forced to relive some of the worst moments of your life over and over again inside your head, and it becomes very difficult to live with, to want to live when you're holding this much pain inside you, or numbness, if you get to that point, where you're feeling nothing. Change your focus and redirect your attention, whether it's reading or watching television or a movie or something like that, taking a walk. Somehow get out of your get a change in scenery and just get out of there. Get a change in direction too, and redirect your attention. And the next thing that I do, which it's very difficult to do, and it does take some bit of work, and that is becoming a witness of, and instead of being actively part of the reliving of these thoughts and stuff like that, taking a step back and looking at it like an outsider and saying and analyzing, why is it that I feel this way? Why am I feeling fear? Why am I feeling dread? Why am I feeling pain, emotional pain? What's causing that? And to analyze it and look at it as a witness from outside. You want to try and observe impartially, and that takes a lot of work, and also a lot of humility too, to be able to look at yourself as you really are as a human being, and not pull any punches, lying to yourself or anything like that, knowing what kind of person you are deep down, and being able to face that, too. I often refer to my lesser half, Mr. Hyde, from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where Mr. Hyde was the persona of Dr. Jekyll, which was violent, sociopath, psychopath. I mean, I don't know what the psychiatric makeup of Mr. Hyde was, but he was all of the evil that was in a person's heart incarnate in flesh. And I have that within me. I have that kind of person, that personality within me, that, it's still me. I'm not dissociative or anything like that, or have, what was then called multiple personality disorder, but now is dissociative identity disorder. But I have that capability of doing great evil, and I have done great evil things in my life that I am not proud of. But the problem with the maladaptive ruminations is that I relive those things and see them over and over again, and the opportunities lost and things that I screwed up. So you want to observe impartially. You also want to try to be creative, do creative visualization. Creative visualization is where you imagine the thoughts as something else. Instead of thinking of them as thoughts, you think of them as leaves on the wind, or cotton, from the cotton fields, how it blows across the state, the highway, when it's time for picking season and stuff like that, and cotton just gets everywhere. You just think of how it's just something that's able to be carried away by the wind, and you're able to kind of let your mind shift into neutral and let your thoughts stop talking. And so, so one of those things is to creatively visualize your thoughts as something else. There's also this next one is kind of counterintuitive. You'd think that it's the opposite of what you want to do, but set aside time for you to actually allow yourself to immerse in your thoughts and in your ruminations, because it's a way for us to process complex emotions, overwhelming emotions. And but allowing yourself to play it out, and setting that time aside, saying, I can't deal with this right now, but I will later on. Delaying it until a point where you now have that time where you're alone, where you're safe, and you're able to deal with that on a personal basis. And so schedule a time to think about the problem. And the next thing, which is something I talk about all the time, which is have a plan. Always have a plan for not if this happens, but when it happens. Not if I go to the hospital, but when I go to the hospital. Have a plan in place. And also work on understanding your thought processes. Be very cognitive, being very mindful of not only the decisions you're making, but how you came about them. Whether you're allowing your emotions and passions to carry your decisions, or are you being more cerebral about them, and despite how bad crappy the decision is, as far as fallout, it's still the best one to make, and the one that's, the adult thing to do. So set some time aside for you to be able to dwell in your thoughts, but like anything else, don't let it get carried away. Don't allow yourself to get so dwelled into your thoughts that you lose yourself. But set that time aside for it and have a plan. Understand, for what you need to do when it gets pretty bad and you can't handle, you don't want to handle it anymore. And the things you would do to distract yourself, to get out of the way, get out of there, get somewhere else, to change your thoughts. Have a plan. Now, something that's similar to maladaptive ruminations, but is not exactly it, is a thing called bipolar flashback. And what that is that it's where you literally relive, a trauma in your life or some other traumatic events, whether it's trauma on an emotional level, deep emotional pain, or it's physical trauma, whether you were assaulted or witnesses a brutal assault, was in combat, any of those things. With the bipolar flashbacks, a lot of it, for me, is emotional trauma that I relive. And it sucks. It really does suck having to live with so much of this pain. I jokingly, say that I'm like a Vulcan. On the surface, very thoughtful, very cerebral. A, B, C. All that. Logic and stuff like that. But under the surface, though, is just a raging boil of emotions and thoughts and passions and stuff like that. Now, they have quieted down over the years. I kind of mellowed some. Medication has helped too, with especially my mood stabilizers like lithium and Abilify, to help me with my moods. But I'll still occasionally get those flashbacks to earlier times, and when those happen, that's when having a plan in place helps, such as knowing frontline things to do, which is distraction or refocus or process it if you have to, if you have no other choice. But you deal with it. You have your first line tools, and then you have your secondary tools, such as medication, whether it's your anti-anxiety pills that you need to take, a sedative. it's stuff like that to have in line, people to call or communicate with, so that you can distract yourself, so you can talk it out, so you can process it, and probably realize it's not such as a big a deal as we're making it out to be. Unfortunately, we catastrophize things and we make things more worse than they really are, and that's one of the things that I'm really bad at doing, is just making, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. I've gotten a lot better at it. I don't do that so much anymore, doom and gloom and stuff like that. But I'm very realistic about worst case scenarios and being prepared to accept those as they happen, instead of, let's hope for the best. I prepare for the worst, because a lot of times the worst has happened to me, and it's it has been hard to deal with, because this is one of those things that for the most part you deal with alone. One of the symptoms of our illness is that we isolate ourselves a lot too, where we are so overwhelmed emotionally and mentally and in our thoughts and stuff like that, that we have to get away from everybody and be alone. And it also allows us to be ourselves, whether, one of the things I do is I talk aloud to myself. I talk to myself, and I have conversations with myself, and both sides. But if you didn't realize that was something that I did, and you're over at my place, and all of a sudden I just belt out a random, what would seem like a random sentence without context, you'd start to wonder about my mental states, But that's just some of the ways I deal with it, though, is talking it out loud, and talking conversation out loud, and working through a problem. And with the bipolar flashbacks, medication has helped lessen it. Time has helped. Working through it is what really helps you the most, though, and not burying it and not ignoring it or hoping it'll go away, after a couple months or something like that. No, these things don't normally go away, and you need to work through this. And so sometimes part of these flashbacks is to live through them and write them out. And you just don't have any choice but to, a lot of times. And these things are debilitating, and they're a distraction, and a lot of times they're comorbid with, like I said, comorbid with an OCD of some kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, which, can add to a person's disability or obstacles they have to overcome, just to function in society. But what I had said before, which kind of goes contrary, is allow to yourself to immerse into to your thoughts and allow them to play off to, what they would be their logical conclusion, however wrong it might be. But don't dwell on it so much, don't glorify it or anything like that, especially if your thoughts are dark and going into dark places and doing harm to yourself or to somebody else, whether it's a stranger or, the guy who deserves it, kind of thing. We have those dark thoughts of how we just want to hurt somebody and make them feel physically the pain that we emotionally are carrying. And so, so when these thoughts start getting stuck in your head and stuck in my head and stuff like that, they become a toxic loop and lead to much worse things and behaviors and attitudes and stuff like that. And, so give yourself time, where you could set aside that you can immerse in your thoughts, but also be able to name them, name what is happening, and observe how it's making you feel. So if you're able to say, all right, I'm obsessing on this particular person and what they did to me or said to me that hurt my feelings, and what they really meant, or what I interpret or project upon them, that, I'm naming what I'm doing. I'm projecting my emotions upon them or my slights upon them, and that I'm attributing motives that probably aren't there. So know what it is that that you're doing, and name it, and say, this is what I'm doing, and be observant of it, and then engage in rewrite. This takes a lot more work, and that is where you're able to change the parameters of what's going on inside your head, for a better way to explain it, such as, you are in a toxic loop, thinking about the death of a friend that happened in Baghdad, and you're dwelling and dwelling and dwelling. Well, maybe you start thinking about, instead of his death, you think about his life and the good times, and you start redirecting your thoughts towards better things, where things that he would have wanted you to do, or she, stuff like that. And you want to engage, you want to rewrite, you want to change the parameters of the flashback, where instead of feeling dread and fear, you look at it for what it really was, or what it really is just an emotional response. It's not real. You're not reliving. It's not really happening. Again, your body thinks it is. Your brain is convinced it's happening, but in reality, it's not really happening, and it's just an emotion. And when you're able to engage with yourself with your flashbacks like that, you should try and get to the point where you can just kind of rewrite things, saying, well, this, instead of this happening. I'm not too sure about this personally, this technique of rewriting history. I think it's deceptive to yourself. I mean, if there's a part of history you'd rather not talk about, that's one thing, but to rewrite it all together and paint it with a pretty brush or something like that, I think does a disservice to you. And so, but if you're going through a flashback, though, you need to figure out a way to engage with it and know how to kind of get a hold of it, so to speak. Again, these things are on an emotional level, and it's really hard to describe the ways that I do it for myself. A lot of my, how I reach inward is through a lot of trial and error, through the many years and decades of my spiritual life, and my, quest for, psychiatric wellness, for a better set of words. Just engage with what's going on with you, and realize that they're just emotional and physical responses. If you're having a panic attack, you realize, all right, I'm not getting short of breath. I'm just hyperventilating. I need to slow my breathing down and go in and out. And then I need to slow my thoughts down and start focusing on something else. I'll look over there. I see a balloon. I'll look at the color and, and everything like that. Something to redirect yourself. And so you do these things, these techniques, and you one of the things that helps me a lot is music, listening to music and drowning out the voices that are just excessively going on inside my ears. And listening to music helps a lot, and helps kind of reset things. And but that's some of the things that I do, and you kind of best way to learn how to be mindful and all that is through a therapist. Working with them, like with cognitive behavioral therapy and other therapy types like that, which helps rewrite the way you think about a situation instead of going to the worst possible scenario and assuming the worst of a person, that they're going to do you wrong or you're going to be hurt. No, you rethink that and you come at it with a more positive attitude, a more realistic attitude, not one of that they're trying to hurt you, but that's somebody that has, emotions just like you and me and everything else, and they're not, out there to hurt me. Now, anyways, let's go ahead and we're going to go take a quick break. And when we come back, we will do a little digging on campaign creation and some of the styles of creating a campaign. So, all right, so let's go ahead and go to commercial. And welcome back to the Bipolar DM Show on WLFE-DB.com, which is our shows are your shows, which make for great talk radio. And we're going to be talking on this half of the hour about campaign creation styles and different ways of creating a campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to first kind of go into an old school style of how we used to do it, how the books used to be, and instructed us on how to create a campaign. And then we're going to look at some newer styles of campaign creation too. When I first started with Dungeons and Dragons, it was back in the early 90s. It was when I first encountered Dungeons and Dragons at the Stars and Stripes bookstore on the military base I was living on. as a kid, and they had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition. Was what they had, and so I bought the Monsters Manual, which was actually a 3D 3-ring binder with loose leaf monsters in it, which was really awesome to have. They had that. Bought the Player's Handbook, and Dungeon Master's Guide also was available then too. I was able to get my hands on that one there. So I had the core 3 books, and that's how I got started. I put an ad in the paper, in the local paper on base for Dungeons and Dragons, and now that I remember it, a buddy of mine, the guy who I ended up playing with, put an ad in the paper about Dungeons and Dragons, and I called asking about it because I was wanting to play, and that's how we ended up meeting one of my friends that I played with, and his friend. And this was when we were in Japan, when I was living in Japan in high school. We did this and played Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons was a life-changing thing for me. For one, for the first time in my life, I had friends outside of high school sucked. Junior high sucked. Elementary school sucked. All the schools I went to really sucked. And I was bullied a lot. I faced a lot of problems being the new kid always. I went to 14 different schools growing up. And so it always sucked being the new kid in school. But, there was positives to it too, because I could always recreate myself and stuff like that, but it never really did. But but I got into Dungeons and Dragons, and it changed my life. And first time I had friends, I had an outlet creatively to process a lot of complex emotions and things I was going through. And I had Dungeons and Dragons to help be a creative outlet to do so. And I had friends, and some good friends. And I was able to have a life outside of school, outside of home for the first time, and know what it was like to be on my own, and to, and then of course going through adventures and stuff like that as the Dungeon Master. I became a forever DM, is what we like to call it, a forever DM, which means that I'm forever a Dungeon Master, because I'm always a Dungeon Master and almost never, ever a player. And very rarely do I get to play. I got to play twice in the last 6 months. It's disappointing. I want to play more. But there's a lot of games to run, and so I can't always, sometimes these things have to take a back seat, for a while. But, the old school way of campaign building, what we did was we created the universe, is what we did, and then kind of went from out the universe and concentrated inward to a world, and from that world to a continent, and from that continent, we start countries and stuff like that, and drawing maps and complex borders and relationships. And so campaigns, one of the first things you got to do if you're building an old school style campaign is you got to do your research. And there was a lot of great books that came out in the 90s by TSR, which at that time was the owners to the rights to Dungeons and Dragons. And TSR put out a bunch of players' handbooks and historical guides, like on the Vikings. That was a great book there. The Norsemen, what Charlemagne's campaign was like, what it was like to live there during that time, so that you had a more realistic understanding of what your character was going through in this fantasy world that was kind of medieval based. And so do your research on this for the historical setting. And even if your world doesn't exist, it's a fantasy, medieval fantasy, Middle Ages, at least go with that and look at what life was like without electricity, when you had mud for dirt floors and stuff and you lived in a shack, barely eking out an existence. These things you want to do your research on, when you build your world. And then you want to start start putting together the geography of it too, the mountain ranges and the lakes and the valleys and the deserts. So building the geology and geography and the ecology too, as you fill it with fauna and animals and monsters, you populate this thing. And you also determine, as you're building your worlds and building this campaign, what the dominant races will be. I'm personally, I'm open to all 5e races. If it's in one of the 5e books, then you can play it. Homebrew, the definition of homebrew is something that you make up. It's not canon. It's not in the D&D manuals or any of their booklets that they have come out. But it's something that you invent, and that's what we call homebrew. And with a homebrew, you create everything. You create the traditions and the dominant races and what the relations between them are like, and what trade is like, and what what's it like, what do the monsters want, and what do they do? Do they organize and have a chieftain of some kind that they work for, or are they alone and fight on their own? Easy to pick off one at a time. You got to think about some of these things as you're populating and building the worlds. And don't be afraid to recycle material. I do it all the time, especially things like from Tolkien and Pierce Anthony and all kinds of authors, movies, whether it's Star Wars or Excalibur or Monty Python. I mean, borrow things from all over the place because you're allowed to. Copyright doesn't apply to a homebrew game, and as you're building this. Now, if you're going to publish something, that's completely different. That's a whole different animal right there. But if this is just for you and your friends, recycle as much as you can get your hands on, and don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, if somebody has a really cool puzzle trap room like from Saw for your PCs to run through and try and see if they can figure out how they can get out of it, go with that. And but also you need to strike a balance between realism and fantasy too, as well. I mean, you can't have things you can go to the extreme on realism that you can go back to 3.5 rules when it comes to combat, and you can have almost every conceivable way of hurting somebody or getting hurt or defending yourself, listed out in the dice rolls and charts. You can go that far, or but at the same time, you don't want to be so lax on the mechanics of the game that you're allowing your players to get away with murder, literally, in the game. You want to find a nice balance between the two of those things as you balance realism versus fantasy, and don't discount the good old-fashioned making maps. Maps are great. There's also some great web pages out there too, where they have pre-printed maps, in a medieval style cities and towns. Some great resources that are out there. Just do some research and you can find it. And make your own maps. Whether it's through a computer or it's just pen and paper. The old-fashioned way. You can create your maps. That way, you at least have an idea of where everything's placed within your world. The kingdom of the dwarves is to the north, so we put them up north, and the elves are on the main plains area, so they're to the east of us, and the humans have settled in the west, and the western regions at the foot of the mountains of these. You begin to build a world around and filling it up. and you start making a history for it too. Why are you have your PCs enter into a valley filled with ruins of some long lost village or fort, and you have just the husks, the walls, and collapsed roofs is all that's left of these buildings, empty doorways, and your PCs are going through that. And so, give a history to how or when or why these things came to be, how these ruins came to be. Maybe the order that of knights that once patrolled these hallways and this forts became corrupted by some malignant force that one by one seized their souls and caused them to kill themselves in some horrific way until only one was left. And you can make all kinds of interesting history that sadly probably will never be known by your players, but it's really fun. So have a history, have a social structure. There a lot of classes back in the Middle Ages. There were social classes where you had your nobility and you had your peasantry, and then you had what's beneath that. You had your lords and your ladies. So you have different social structures. So put some thought into the social structures in your made-up city, and have some thought to why those things are in place. What does it mean for, if you have some kind of strict segregation going on between the classes or the races? Why is that? And give names to countries and describe great wars and governments. All these things you can put into building on your world. And that's, what we used to do was we put all these great big things in. The problem, though, if you haven't seen yet, is that a lot of the stuff does not impact the character for at least, the first maybe 7 or 8 levels. Who cares what the trade balance is like between this kingdom and that kingdom at first level when you don't even have 2 coppers to rub together, let alone worry about the economical impact of a war on the border in the rice trade and the possible famine that might cause, those kind of things. But don't be... don't be hesitant to sprinkle those things in, though, too, because you just don't want to overdo any one thing, and know what your players are like. If your players like puzzles and figuring things out, then, rip off as many puzzles as you can. Steal from the Saw movies, or some other kind of puzzle makeup, that you can find like on drivethrurpg.com. They have some great booklets with puzzles in them already made up that you can use or adapt or recycle. And also, in addition to your social, you want to have a mythology in the world too, kind of like what the roles of good and evil are in this world, and what checks and balances are keeping them in place in the grander scheme of gods and wizards and stuff like that. And have a mythology too, to round out and flesh out your world and gods and religions and different things like that. And you do all these things and you're going to have a very rich, rounded campaign. The problem, like I said, is that the characters usually don't see 90% of this stuff until maybe 7th, 8th, or 9th level, or if at all. A lot of times what happens is they take a left turn out the front door, and I have no idea where the fuck they're going. And it goes off the rails, and all the work that I put into the game is just gone, all the hours I put in. And so I've learned to roll with it and to improvise and adapt to those situations when they do happen. Not if, but when they do happen. I adapt to those, and I learn to enjoy them too. And the things that my players will come up with. And so have some fun with creating your mythology of the world and the role of good and evil in it and stuff like that. Now, another way of creating a campaign, and this one I like a lot, and this is by Sly Flourish, is called a spiral campaign. And instead of creating gods and histories and great wars and things that happened centuries ago, you create a tavern. You create a couple of shops. You get a street. You get a small area. You get the stomping grounds of the player characters. Not this big, huge world for them to explore, but just a local neighborhood, And as they explore outwards into the greater world, you build the railroad tracks ahead of the train. You adapt as and write as your characters, your player characters develop. And I'm actually trying this out myself and enjoy it a lot. It does cut down a lot on the work because it makes me concentrate on the essentials, such as combat. Having my combat encounters done up on the computer through D&D Beyond ahead of time so that I can run them smoothly. That's essential to do. That's one of those things I got to do. But there's a lot of things that I don't have to do, too, such as writing the history of this god that died off 10,000 years ago and nobody remembers his name or even worships him. What's the point in that? But if I have a bard who needs somebody to sing a prayer to in order for a spell to work, then, there you go. But with the spiral campaign technique by Sly Flourish, you concentrate first on where they're at right there. Whether it's the tavern that they're in, the town that they're in. Instead of building up the main capital of the kingdom over here, which they're not going to see for quite a while, concentrate instead on the town that they are in and fleshing that out. And so you start with that and you build your world around the PCs as they explore it. So, if they go to the left, all right, you can make it up as you go along. You go to the right, roll with it. They go straight, hey, there's that work that you put in. But don't get so hung up about how this develops. This is an organic game, and so concentrate locally, not globally, on this, and be where the PCs are at. And now. That's Sly Flourish's. Now, another technique, and I'm not going to go into details on how to do it, but is called the convention gaming or the tourney play, in which you design your game to run within a set time limit. Usually 3 hours, 4 hours, around there. And the game has a beginning, middle, and end, with a resolution by the end of that time period, whether hell or high water, you've got to be done by that time. And you design a game radically differently in that sense. It's more like a railroad where you only have one direction you're going in those kind of game settings than you do in an open world sandbox that I like to play also. But convention gaming or tournament play, those are a lot of fun. Those also, a lot of times, the best ways to set those up and to create those is to use modules, pre-written adventures already, where all the work's already been done for you, and you just have to make some little bells and whistle changes on it to be ready to play. And so you want to concentrate on doing the things that are going to matter the most, getting the most, the biggest bang for your buck. And so you also have a lot of economy in play too in a tourney game, because you want to be mindful of, you don't want to waste everybody's time in farting around on something when you got a time limit, when the next game's coming up or when the next panel is going to be. To get some autographs or whatnot, there's a definite end coming, and come hell or high water, that game is ending on that time. And that's a lot of fun too, because it's different. But that's a different way of doing games. And however you decide to do it, do it your way. My technique has just kind of developed and evolved over the years, and just things that work for me and my OCDs and my ADDs and all that. I know how I prep, and get things ready to go. It's things that work for me and probably won't work for other people. Maybe, but then again, who knows? Maybe they will work for other people. But that's neither here nor there. There's a set time limit in tourney play and convention gaming, and you want to button things up neatly by the end of a game. And that's also should be the aim for every session, to design the session so that it lasts, whatever your time frame is, whether it's 3 hours like I like to do, or 4 hours, which is pretty typical. When you're playing a 3-4 hour game, you got beats in it, and you got your beginning, middles, and ends, your highs and your lows that go on through the evening or through the day as you play, and things that are in the sense of the game very real, and so that's where you start experiencing a lot of buy-in into the game and stuff like that, when it starts seeming real. And things start mattering in this fantasy world of what you do and how things interact. And it's very amazing when you experience that in a good game going on, Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. This is the Bipolar DM Show. I am your host, Jason, the Bipolar DM. And if you want to get a hold of us, you can email me at thebipolardm@gmail.com, or visit my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Bipolar DM Show. You can watch us live Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here where you're watching this now, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook. You can also go to WLFE-DB.com. You can find us, if you have a Roku, you can get on Stream TV and find us on the Variety Unlimited channel, and also on twitch.tv/TheBipolarDM. That's where we're at as well. So thank you so much. Next week we'll have something else coming up. Don't know what it is yet, but we will figure it out. Thank you again for tuning in, and remember, everybody, to take your meds.
Thank you for listening to the Bipolar DM. They love sharing thoughts and ideas. See you next week, 7 p.m. Saturdays on WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows, and that makes for great talk radio. WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. Check out our channels: Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows, LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows, Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFE-DB.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.